Now, today, I've taken up some of my time, but that's okay, talking about the same thing. Healthy boundaries. We all know how important boundaries are. There was I came across a tidbit of American history that we don't even think about or know of, and that's the history of the Michigan-Ohio War of 1835 and 36. It was over a boundary. Anybody ever heard of it? Probably haven't. My husband has. He knows about it. There was a war over a 486 square mile region along their common boundary. And unable to resolve their differences, the governors sent out their troops to battle, and gathering over either side of the Maumee River. And that's near present-day Toledo, by the way. They traded insults and got drunk, is what they did when they got together. Congress intervened, granting the disputed territory to Ohio. That's why it's Toledo, Ohio, instead of Michigan. And to make up for it, they carved out the Upper Peninsula from Wisconsin, and they gave it to Michigan. Isn't that cool? I didn't know that. Our younger daughter, Jonna, worked 2 of her summers in college on the UP at Mackinac Island. Fascinating place. If you've never been to Mackinac Island, you need to go. But the UP, the Upper Peninsula, was rich in all sorts of ore. And it's one of the things that led to the Industrial Revolution. First, Michigan didn't want it. It didn't take many years for them to say, wow, we're sure glad we have that. Led to the Industrial Revolution, and then, of course, Detroit becoming such an important place. So who would have known about boundaries? And don't let anyone ever tell you that your personal boundaries don't matter. They do. A lot of people grow up in families where they don't even know what a personal boundary is, much less respect it. I think that a lot of that is changing, though, as people become wiser, more conscious. They want to have conscious awareness in raising their families. It's a wonderful thing. 50, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, most people weren't even aware that they could harm their children with the things they did or didn't do. They just felt like if they got them grown, that's all they needed to do. Now, we've been talking a lot about the last few months. October 1st, I started a series on discovering yourself, your spirituality, and using maps and how to map your own territory. Talking about maps, and one Sunday I had a map up there of how we've gone here, we've gone there, we've zigzagged sometimes, someplace things we can see were divinely orchestrated and we paid attention. Other things that we did, we would say, wow, that looked like a mistake. And then as we get older, get a little more wisdom, we begin to see, well, that was in divine order too, wasn't it? Because I learned a lot from that. So when we set healthy boundaries, we acknowledge our true worth and our spiritual approach to life. So I'm going to talk about that for just a moment. Unity minister and author Ellen Davenport several years ago wrote a book about the 5 principles of unity. And those are the ones that we recognize. There's one power and one presence, that's God. Each of us has the inherent ability to connect with that and a divine source. through our thoughts, we make our lives positive or negative. Our time in the quiet is how we connect to God. And then the fifth is to walk your talk. She said she sure wished she could write that book over again, because if she did, she would add a sixth principle, and that would be mind your own business. I always thought that was pretty cool when I first read what she said, and that was interesting because she had gone all over the country talking about those 5 principles and describing them to everybody. And I guess it's during the course of all the things she's done, and she was a pastor or a minister like me for many years in a much bigger church, though. And she's gone on to work at Unity headquarters now. But she continues to say that a sixth principle would be to mind our own business. That's pretty powerful, isn't it, if she would throw it in with all those other big principles? But she was saying how important that is toward moving forward, and how if we can just do that, we'll allow others to live our lives as we take responsibility for our own. My father, I remember, I was laughing this week when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about and boundaries. And I was thinking how when I was young, I think I was about 10 years old, and my father worked shift work out at one of the plants there in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And he would work, and he'd come home, and it depended on getting a good night's rest. And so on the weekend, he would have a call sometimes from a neighbor. There were 6 children in our family. There were 6 children in the neighbor's family. And the mother and father were totally different than my parents. This mother and father weren't as conscientious and responsible as my parents were. They were really, my parents were the mother and father you expected back in the 50s or the early 60s. And very responsible, took care of their children and fed them. And the other parents weren't like that. They lived right next door to us. But the father, although he had a much higher paying job than my father did at one of the nuclear sites there in Oak Ridge, he drank. And he drank just about every night, but especially on weekends. And I remember he'd call, it'd be 12 o'clock, or it would be late, maybe the middle of the night, I don't even know now. And he'd say, my dad's name was Dan. Dan, I'm sick, he'd say. And what had happened, he was either at a bar, he was stranded somewhere, he was drunk, maybe he'd been thrown in jail. Would you come get me, he'd say. And I can't tell you how many times my dad, trying to be a good friend, did just that. He'd get up out of bed, get dressed, and go get this man and bring him home, thinking he was doing a good thing for him and his family. And so I do remember the one night, though, I was awake when my dad went to the phone. He listened to that for a minute. He said, Wayne, I'm sick too. Don't you ever call me again. And he hung up. And I remember that as being a boundary that my father finally did. And I don't think the other man ever changed. I don't think the family ever changed. My mother was very kind, and a couple of the younger children were hungry. The mother was gone too. She drank also. And mother would always feed them if they came to the house hungry. Of course she would. But that phone call, I was thinking about that this week. And I know that's a little bit of a drastic use of that, but how many times do we bail people out because we think we have to? We take responsibility for their lives because we think that's what we need to do. They've asked us, so we give in to that. But there comes a time when, just like my dad said to his friend, "Don't ever call me again." And I think there comes a time when you have to set boundaries, and hopefully they don't come to that. Hopefully it's not of such a degree that you need to take such a drastic step, but sometimes it does. It's important to set financial boundaries around ourselves too. How many times have we allowed people to borrow money from us knowing they'd never pay us back, and then it puts us in a bind? I used to do that when I was younger and single. I remember that, and allowing other people to borrow money from me a few times till I realized, you know what, they're not going to pay it back, and I won't be able to pay my rent either. You know, I was just a young kid at that time. 18, whatever. But it didn't take me long to learn that lesson. That when we do that, financial, emotional boundaries, and it's also important, and I don't want to step on any toes here, but I want you to understand this is important too. Religious and spiritual boundaries. Religion makes some people think they have the right, and not just the right, but the sacred duty to tell the rest of us what we must believe, think, and feel. How do you feel about that? Many of us may have even grown up in a church or where some of the deacons would just show up unannounced any night of the week they wanted to, so they could pray with you because they knew that you needed God in your life. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And now, the people that will stop at your door so they can save you. Right? Anyway, that's enough about that. Healthy spirituality begins when we can find ourselves the strength, the courage, and independence to follow our own light. And that's from Philip Gulley, who is a minister in the Quaker faith. They believe a lot the way we do, that there is an inner light. And they don't believe that anyone else has the right to condescend to you and try to tell you what you ought to believe about God and being saved. So boundaries, they're a gift to us and everybody. So if we want to have a healthy sense of self-worth, work on having self-confidence and reflect, this is who I am. This is how I expect to be treated. I'm a child of God just the way you are. I have an innate sense of who I am. And I don't need you to tell me. I certainly don't need you to tell me how I need to be saved or what I need to believe. This is who I am. I'm a child of God. I'm a child of the universe. Remember, this is important. You don't need to explain When you have people requesting something of you that you don't want to do, give yourself time to respond. You don't have to say yes, and if you start to say yes, but you've got an inner knowing that you don't want to say yes, bite your tongue. Bite it. Hard if you have to. Remember that no thank you can be a complete sentence, period. Okay? So what are some unhealthy techniques that people can use instead of saying no thank you? And we know this happens. They'll avoid you and hide. Because instead of saying no, thank you, or saying their truth, no, I don't want to hear that, no, thank you, I don't, whatever it is, they'll avoid you. And then they'll hide. And hiding is a great technique, isn't it? That can really work for you. Except you just might turn into a mushroom if you're not careful. Hiding in the dark is not what you were sent here to do. The Creator sent you here to shine and to be a light, just like the Quakers believe, to be a light. Giving in to others and saying yes when you want to say no, that's extremely unhealthy territory. And the thing is, then it sets you up and them up too. For all sorts of occurrences that happen, then you back out at the last minute. And there, I serve on all sorts of committees that at the last 2 or 3 days, you end up with like 5 fewer people than you had planned on. And so you're having to do double time because somebody said yes when they meant no, and then they got sick at the last minute. We know that. We see that excuse a mile away. We intuit that. Making up excuses that rather than simply saying, no, thank you. No, thank you. And then on the other end, be a gracious enough person that if you've asked someone and they've told you no, can you let it go? Or are you the one that persists? I know you said no, but now I'm going to try to talk you into something else because I think I know right. There are 2 sides to that. So those are unhealthy boundaries, either side of that one. Setting healthy boundaries is an act of self-love and a sacred commitment to honor the divinity within ourselves and others. I honor the divinity within me, and I honor the divinity within you. Let me make sure I covered all my slides. I'm covering all my boundaries here. Okay, I did. Okay. So this morning, as you think about what I've said, healthy boundaries, this is a spiritual topic. No matter what you think, it may be one of the most spiritual. Focus on your own soul's path and growth. Discipline your thoughts toward creating your own experience. Allow others to do the same, even when it's our children. And we mothers know that one well, don't we? Boy, you talk about lessons and boundaries. It never ends. It never ends. We can't help it. We just can't help it. We're mothers, then we're grandmothers, and it just keeps on. Then we'll be great-grandmothers, and so we're just continuing to learn that. Allow them to grow, and grow at their own speed, and not push them either. Then trust that all is well. Give up labels and judgment. We really don't know what's best for someone else. We really don't. So maybe, more than any other time, the most godly and spiritual thing we can do is to mind our own business. Thank you for your time.